All right, so I'm back talking about high tunnel infrastructure. I know in the program it says automation, and I'll be talking a lot about that as well. What we're going to be talking about today: construction considerations, irrigation infrastructure, trellising infrastructure, automation including sidewall ventilation, soil moisture sensors, solenoid irrigation, humidity control, and acidification of irrigation water, because that is what we do on our farm, and we've actually found it to be very helpful. So I think I didn't know who all was going to be in the crowd. I think a lot of you are already growing in high tunnels, so you already know that if you're building a house of plastic, it's not a matter of if, it's when the weather will win. So I think starting out with realistic expectations of planting in a tunnel, in a building that you can cut with an X-Acto knife. And we've seen it all on our farm. We always have an extra roll of plastic in inventory for when a straight line wind is going to rip off the plastic. Because, yeah, we've had to do that many a time. We've had hailstorms. The photo on the right is not a heavy snow load at all. I just couldn't find a picture of when we've had feet and feet of snow in Minnesota. And we chose the Zimmerman High Tunnel that are big and sturdy with, we have our trusses every 6 feet. Yeah, because we could do further distance in between. We have the W trusses because we don't plan to go out there and scrape off the snow. We want our high tunnel to be strong enough so we don't have to do that monotonous job. The first time we built a high tunnel, we just plopped it on the land. And then as we built more, we started to think, okay, how do we actually want this high tunnel community to be like? So now we have, my neighbor came over with his excavating equipment, and for half a day of work, I think it was like $200. Maybe he was feeling generous. I don't know how much it always will cost, but we kind of bermed and swaled around our high tunnels because we found often the water running off of our high tunnels, if it was just not sloped correctly, sometimes we'd have pooling inside our high tunnel, and we were like, well, hey, I thought we were keeping the rainwater out. So berming and swaling around our high tunnels we found to be very helpful. Before we did that, we put up gutters, and this immense snow load, I didn't buy heavy enough gutters. We took those off and bermed and swaled instead. I think considering the orientation on your land with sun and the prevailing wind, are you going to build more high tunnels? If you have the excavating equipment there to berm and swale, might you berm and swale future spots of high tunnels? We have put in utilities way too many times. I wish I would have been more thorough in my thinking just to get all the utilities in once and done. But we have, to all of our high tunnels, we have 2-inch water irrigation, we have electricity, and then we also have a sprinkler wire, and that's for all of our solenoid valves that we have set up with one controller. We can talk about that in a sec. And then after the fact, we put in propane as well. So we already talked about the W truss. We have wind bracing. You can't see it in these photos, but actually now we have bracing from that last truss all the way down, and we have it there to there as well. And then you can see here some more wind bracing because, yeah, in the Midwest, I mean, you get strong winds anywhere. And I know some of you folks in Iowa have had those derechos. At least we're not, well, yeah. We have put up all of our hay tunnels with a wooden hip board and a wooden baseboard, and we've had to replace those over the years. So if you can afford it, I mean, we still have wood everywhere. But as they break, we're replacing them with metal, and if you can, it's worth building it right and then not having to do that in the future. A few tips that we've learned in building high tunnels is leveling the ground. And I should say, what I mean by this is not bringing in heavy equipment and leveling the high tunnel. I really mean like having an area where water can drain away. I did not word that how I wanted it to appear. And then run the utilities first. Most of you have already put up your high tunnels, but one little hack that we figured out, the first tunnel we had our post pounder and we were pounding in all of the posts up on ladders. But now, as we've become more sophisticated, we use the bucket of our tractor. One person is, holding the post. The other person is on the tractor. The bucket of the tractor has a heavy chain that is just hanging, and because of gravity, it's going to be hanging level if you're not moving the bucket, so you kind of have to wait for it to stop swaying. And so that shows the person holding the post kind of like visually, I need to bend it more this way, because if you're just standing there, it could look very different from a different angle. You might see that it looks level. And then we have magnetic levels that we put on one side and then the other side of that post. And at that point, you say, okay, and then the tractor operator pushes down 6 inches, lifts up, because the bucket goes at an arc. It doesn't just go straight up and down. And then once you lift up, then you can lift down again, lift up, push down again, and then we have marked on the post how far we want it to go down. So that has saved us a few headaches as we built more and more high tunnels. Or you can also rent those pneumatic or hydraulic or post pounders. I'm not sure the correct word for that. We use, going back to the previous picture, you can see landscape fabric because I don't want to be weeding that by hand. So we actually put our posts in first, and then we roll out our landscape fabric somewhere else in the field, cut holes or X's, and then we thread it through because it is helpful not to be pushing that post through the landscape fabric because it will buckle. When we're building our trusses, we take the time to build a perfect truss on the ground. We do it in our shop, which has concrete. And so then we can, using tape, basically create an outline, like this is where the intersection of the W truss is. So then we can just mass produce them afterwards. And then once we have all of our trusses built, we have all of our posts in the ground, then we will go on with our tractor and bucket and attach a 4x4 piece of lumber to our bucket with a groove at the end. I should say this 4x4 is probably as long as you can buy it at Menards. So I don't know. Let's just say it's 20 feet. And then we have a little notch at the end, and it's going to create a cradle for the peak of the truss to sit in. So if you're very careful, it's very precarious, but you can drive into the high tunnel, lift it high enough so then you have one person on one post, on the left post, and one person on the right post guiding it into that post. So those are just a few tips that we've learned as we've built more and more. End walls, I don't have any strong opinions about end walls. Lots of different examples. And the one on the left is how we do our end walls. One question is to ask is, do you ever plan to bring a tractor inside? Because then you need a tractor-sized door. So we do have a tractor-sized door, but we just never bring a tractor through. Before you put your end walls in is a good opportunity to do some last tractor work operation. So we went through and subsoiled and then rototilled before we put our end walls in because it saved us some time. So plastic contracts when it's really hot. And so if you put the plastic on your high tunnel on a really cold day, like we did when we put up this tunnel, it was probably like 40 degrees. It was really tight the day we put it up, but then it got really hot. I'm sorry, it loosens on a hot day. I said that wrong. And so what happened is we got a heavy rain, and I'm going to use it with my mouse because I don't think I can't. Well, the arrow is pointing right there. So there's this purlin right here, and water, as it ran off the high tunnel, it kind of pooled and made a bowl, and it got heavier and heavier, and eventually the weight of the water just busted through the roof. We replaced that plastic. It was also time for that plastic. We rotate our plastic out every 5 years unless a windstorm takes it off sooner, and it's really convenient when the windstorm takes it off at a convenient time. So you can still tighten your plastic on a cool day, just come back when it's really hot. We have double on one of them, and I'll show some stats on how helpful that is. Oh, this is the next slide. So 2 layers with air in between increases the R value of your roof. Is it helpful to only have it on your roof and not on your sidewalls and end walls? Probably a little helpful, but it's more helpful if you can do your whole tunnel. And we do have our end walls blown up as well. So this next slide, we use iMonit to monitor our temperature. So in tunnel 1, we have the double layer inflated plastic. And so, yeah, so on top, the lowest temperature it ever got was 28.2 degrees. And tunnel 2 only has a single layer of plastic, no supplemental heat. It went down to 24.98. So that's a 3.24 degree difference, which could be the difference between life or death depending on what crop you are growing. So we automate our sidewall ventilation. We work with Smart Farm Innovations, and they helped set us up. That's Robert Arnold. So this is a controller box that he made for us. So we can manually turn it onto auto, and when it's on auto, our side walls are going to open and close dependent on whatever the thermostat is and the thresholds that we have set for it. I can also, the thermometer is telling, the thermostat is telling the tunnel walls to open, but I actually want them closed because it's really windy, so I can manually override it. So on the bottom, that's what the guts look like, and I couldn't build it, so I'm really glad I found someone who could. And it is so helpful having that ventilation automated. I don't live on the farm, and so that has really taken away a lot of trips back and forth to the farm. But also I will say this does a way better job than I ever did. So you go out to the farm, first thing in the morning, you open up all the tunnels. Then you do your day, you're working, but I noticed that it got cloudy. It's no longer sunny. Well, I'm not gonna stop what I'm doing over in this field and walk all the way over there and close it. It'll warm up again, I'm sure. So if I'm just adjusting it manually, I'm missing out on a lot of opportunities to keep the plants growing in a really optimum temperature. The other thing about automating it is I can be at happy hour and I can see a storm is rolling in, and on my phone, I can close the tunnels. And that quality of life decision has made a huge impact on my life. Yeah. He's out east, but he actually will go, if you can group together some farms, he will come and help you set it up. Otherwise, it's not too tricky depending on what you're asking to do. Like if I was just doing controllers for sidewall automation, he can just ship it to me and I can set it up, no problem. Yeah, and I saw a question over there.
Well, it's a pretty basic question, but where have you found the best place to put your pictures in your tunnel? Because we have the same type, we have the same temperature sensor, and we're just really struggling to find a place where we don't get spikes, from the sun, or like we shade it and then we end up with like cool temperature that's not really representative. So I'm just curious what you're putting in.
Yeah, we move them as the plant grows. So the tip of the thermostat is inside this shaded, but it's like a plastic shield, but it has holes in it, so it's ventilated. And then we move it as the plant grows. So like for example, in our greenhouse, we use the same stuff. We set it right by where the plant is. In our high tunnel, we are moving it and it's not in direct sunlight, so there's fewer of those spikes. Okay, so we also have, I mentioned we got this grant, so now all of our high tunnels have heaters. So the bottom right, that's our thermostat for our heaters. That's pretty self-explanatory. And then we also have solenoid valves that we can turn on and off different zones of irrigation, which I wanted to mention it now, but we'll talk more about it later. But all of this means that I need to have Wi-Fi, electricity, and water access, utilities out to, and I should say propane, out to the tunnel community, which is not a low-hanging fruit by any means. So I mentioned Smart Farm Innovations, and then also Orisha is one that I've heard of. I haven't used. I'm going to call out. Yeah, so if you have any questions, you can about Orisha specifically, and I know there's many more out there. But I wanted to show this drop-down column on the Orisha website. You can manage through their controllers: side ventilation, disease prevention, irrigation, heating, advanced ventilation, wind protection, and rain protection. So once you start thinking about automation, really, there's tons of things that you could do. But as was previously mentioned, if you just set it and forget it, it doesn't work like that. I'm constantly monitoring that. Number one, the system is working, because the internet can go out, but the electricity is still on, so I don't get the message. Maybe there's a clog in the drip tape, and but I don't get it. It told me that it irrigated it 5 times in the last week, but why is this plant dry? So it requires tons of monitoring, and setting the parameters requires a lot of knowledge. And you need to know that before you can set it up. So, where did I go? Yeah. So this is a roll-up curtain on our Polytex tunnel. So this motor is set up to my controller, and it is rolling up the sidewall based on the parameters that I set. But all our other high tunnels are drop-down curtains, which I actually prefer. It requires a lot more creative thinking in terms of hooking up your motor. I have a slide in a second, but I wanted just to talk about ventilation in context of roll-up sides versus drop-down curtains. So in the roll-up side, it's really hot in the peak of your tunnel. You open up your roll-up sides, cool air is coming in and kind of getting trapped up here. So if you have no other end wall vents or peak vents, you're getting a lot of hot air, and as the crop is growing up, if it grows into this growing space, now we're talking about tomatoes aborting flowers. Roll down sides, it gets hot in the tunnels, so they start opening from the top of the sidewall, so cool air is coming down here, pushing that hot air, hot air rises, so pushing the hot air down to the plant. Again, without any end wall ventilation, you're ending up with warm air. Now let's say you have a ridge vent and you have roll-up curtains. So now you're creating this chimney effect, moving that hot air out. And so now you don't have that hot air trapped up there. And then roll-up sides with end doors. It's still hot up here, but at least, I don't know, maybe it's closer to warm because you do have your end doors open. So this is a really cheap, relying on no utilities, no electricity, that can open and close these louvers on your end walls just to move that air out. So I do want to talk about the difference between ventilation and circulation. So ventilation is exchanging outside air with inside air. Circulation is circulating the air inside, so that's a uniform growing space. So without any ventilation or circulation, you're going to have dead spots. You're going to have spots of high heat, spots of low temperatures. You're going to have spots of high oxygen and low carbon dioxide. So mixing all the air together to create a uniform growing environment is really important. But also dumping out all that heat so you're not creating a super hot or super high humidity growing environment is a call for really good ventilation. And you can have passive ventilation through opening doors, or you could have active ventilation through having exhaust fans with louvers on the other side. There's a lot of different ways to do it, and I'm no engineer, but I do understand the importance of both circulation and ventilation. So before we automated, this is what we had this hand crank, and this is how I would open and close the sidewalls. Tons of labor. Lots of times I forgot to do it, and many times I didn't do it enough, and many times I didn't do it at the right times. So by automating it, it just really drastically changed how many days we had a good growing environment in our high tunnel. So this is a cheaper motor, and for the drop-down curtains, I had to basically create this plate where I welded this motor onto this winch. So as the motor turns, it's rolling up or rolling out the cable on the spool. I like this one better. It's more expensive. Both these motors have limit switches, and that's really important because, the motor will be moving as long as it's getting electricity to it, but you don't want it to roll past you want it to roll up until the tunnel's closed and roll down until it's open. So by setting the limit switches, you can limit how much it opens. In the shoulder seasons, and you can also change the limit switches over time, which at times can be helpful. So you asked a question about location of the sensors and this is what it looks like. So that's what it looks like. So put your temp sensor where your plant is. So this is a graph of how the temperature is being regulated by opening and closing the sidewalls. Also in this tunnel, I have heat and I set the thermostat to 60 degrees because below 60 degrees, tomatoes aren't really so happy. So this temperature graph shows both things going on. So 5 a.m., it gets hot right there, my sidewall's open, the temperature drops. And then the temperature creeps up and then it gets to another threshold where it drops again. And where the sidewall's open again, and so forth. Then this day it probably is cloudy, and then overnight you can see it drop below 60 degrees. So now my heater is turning on, and I set the parameters probably for like 59 to like 63 degrees or something. So turning on, turning off, turning on, turning off, turning on, turning off. And now here is probably a really sunny day. So look at all these decisions that the automation is making without me even thinking about it. There's no way I was in the high tunnel opening and closing all day long. Heater's on again this night. Heater's not on this night because it's above 60 degrees and such. So it's really keeping the plants in a really happy position. But the dangers of creating a system dependent on electricity and Wi-Fi. This is a screenshot of the radar one day. And like I said, I can change it from my phone, but the system also is going to call me and send me a text if it loses electricity or if it loses. And you can set the parameters. If the temperature gets below 49 degrees, call me, or 32 degrees, call me. If you lose Wi-Fi, call me. Have a backup plan. So we have a generator, a small generator that we can plug our greenhouse in, that we can plug into our greenhouse and control which circuits are on. So it's small enough generator that I can just turn on tunnel 1 with enough electricity that I can go manually open the sidewalls. So like for example, one day we lost electricity when all the tunnels were closed. Then it got really sunny. We didn't have electricity for a day and a half. My other option would be just to cut it with an X-Acto knife. Otherwise, all the plants would die. But we had a backup plan thought of beforehand that we could open them all. Okay, so moving on to, question.
Sorry, just one note on that. The little 18-volt or 20-volt washer, the volt batteries, you get hot wire those motors.
Oh, yeah.
So you don't have the generator.
Yeah. Yes. Smart. A lot more inexpensive. Okay, so in each tunnel, this manifold is in every tunnel, and it looks pretty complicated, but really if you just follow where the pipes are going, it's not. So water comes into the tunnel, and I have a solenoid valve right here. Each tunnel can be turned on or off with a controller. So the water comes into this tunnel and then out to the next tunnel, and it goes into that tunnel and out. If it gets past the solenoid valve, then it goes through, I have this Mazzy injector, so if I wanted to treat one tunnel differently than another tunnel, this is how I can feed that tunnel nutrients. But most often, it just goes straight through. I have a filter, which is very important. And then it can either go up for overhead irrigation, I have 2 zones, or it can go down to drip irrigation, and I have a pressure reducer here. And then I always have water available if you need to rinse a tool, wash your hands, spray something down. And so these solenoid valves right here, I can also turn that on and off from my phone. And I can turn it on for 30 minutes and walk away from it. There are times that gunk gets stuck in those solenoid valves and it hasn't turned off after 30 minutes, so you can never just set it and forget it. Weekly, I go through, clean all the filters, do a test run, especially if I go camping for the weekend, I do that the day I leave to make sure I feel good about turning on the irrigation from my phone when I'm somewhere else. Blow out your lines. I think I say this 3 times in this presentation. We just blew out all of our lines for the winter. And before we blew out all the lines, because we fertigate with our irrigation, we also sanitized them. We filled the system with a Sanidate solution, let it sit for a week, blew it out, did it again for another week, blew it out, and then flushed it out with water, and then we blew it all out with air. How are you going to irrigate in your high tunnels in the spring and fall when you have frost? We only have 1 tunnel that has a frost-free hydrant. I wish we had more. And the line supplying that hydrant is only 1 inch, so we don't have enough water pressure to do the same overhead irrigation system that we have set up with a 2-inch line, because I designed my overhead irrigation system when it was summer that I didn't think about the pressure or the gallons per minute. So that's something to think through as you're thinking through those systems. So on the left, these are inverted mini wobblers that I can use with my frost-free hydrant. This system, I forget what they're called, but these are spaced out every 30 feet. These are spaced out every 3 feet. I don't have enough water pressure to use this system in the 2 tunnels that I installed it in with my frost-free hydrant. But overhead irrigation doesn't need to be fancy. These are just tripod sprinklers from Menards. And I priced out, I guess this is my overhead infrastructure for the irrigation. 2-inch source, 1-inch supply line, and then the rest of this is 3/4 inch. This is just not inverted, but the opposite of the hanging, the wobblers. And here's one priced out. The overhead is more expensive than the stuff on the ground, but the overhead, you install it once, you don't have to trip over it, you don't have to cultivate over it. So that was a better decision for us. So sometimes you think through a system. So we just built a new tunnel, so we just put in overhead irrigation, the system that I like that's spaced out with the inverted mini wobblers. And we also put in circulation fans. So right now, this is our fix, but before we did this fix, the emitter was actually above our circulation fans. So all of our circulation fans were tripping the breaker on the GFCI cord. So we had to, there's Sergio extending all of the lines, and it worked. But you think through everything, and there's always something you miss. So moving on to overhead trellising. So we utilize the structure so we can grow vertically. Like I mentioned this morning, we used to grow all the way to the peak. We had super tall ladders, but we finally put in overhead lines that are 6 feet. And about 80% of our crew can reach that. It might be 6.5 feet because I can't reach it. And so that means we never have to use a ladder. We thought through all the different materials we could use to affordably put in that overhead line, and what we decided on was electrical fencing from Menards. In this picture, we have rebar going, and I don't like that because our tomato hooks don't sit. It's too steep of an angle, too acute of an angle, so they always fall off in a heavy windstorm. So not rebar, we have an electroline here. These drops that we make, this is the materials that we use to make those. And then we just run that electrical wire through and attach it from end wall to the other end wall. Because tomato plants, cucumber plants have tremendous weight associated with them. So, like I mentioned, chaotic and unsafe, plus low and expensive. These are drywall stilts. Benny did not like them. He actually fell, unfortunately. He didn't hurt himself, but, and then we've tried everything, all the different materials that you could use for attaching your tomato plant to. What we like best are these roller hooks because they're really easy to lower and lean and let out more line. And then like I mentioned earlier this morning, we use this Tom system. Didn't love these. And the Florida basket weave, it's just too much vegetation and it's a lot, the ease of harvest with the lower and lean singular system for tomatoes has really helped us. So Natalie started this conversation about pH, and we similarly have had problems with high pH or basic conditions in our high tunnels. So, but we didn't know anything about pH or acidifying our irrigation water. We just saw, our tunnels, our soil test says that we have everything that we need. Why does our plant look crummy? And you can see that in 2019, in this tunnel, we had a really great soil test. Our pH was 6.9. In 2020, I thought, we love compost, the more the merrier. So I put way too much cow manure compost in. Our pH just increased up to 7.8, and then we had the really sad tomatoes. And the picture previous was an example of iron deficiency. Well, my soil test said I had plenty of iron, but look at this. So at a pH of 7.8, iron is barely available to that plant. So that's why we're really interested in growing in this range right here when the majority of the nutrients are available to the plant. The higher the pH, the more your micronutrients are no longer available to the plant. So what did we do in this tunnel? We added an elemental sulfur to reduce the pH of the soil as it's a microbial activity. So as the microbes are oxidizing the elemental sulfur, it's creating sulfuric acid, which is acidifying your soil. The other thing that we started doing was acidifying our irrigation water at the same time. And so our goal was to mimic the rainwater pH of 5.8. Our irrigation well water in Minnesota, super high in alkalinity, our pH was 7.6. So through doing these two things, in 2025, our soil test was a pH of 6.8, and our plants look much healthier. Now, how do we acidify our irrigation water? So I have to credit my husband, Lee, who used to be a high school chemistry teacher, because the year before he joined the farm, I tried to do this myself through trial and error, and I had a hard time that I just gave up. pH is not a linear scale, it's a logarithmic scale, so it's not like, it's really hard to map out. So when you're just doing trial and error, first off, it's really hard to math out when you're dealing with like alkalinity and pH and all the other things that are a part of that equation. And I'm no chemist, so I don't pretend that I know all of this, but I do know I had a hard time. Then my husband joined the farm, and he figured it out in an hour. So I asked him to create this slide for me. So first, what he did is he created a concentrated solution with citric acid and water and used gloves. We use a powdered citric acid. You can see what we buy below. And it's not, I think we only used 3 bags this year. Each bag is, well, probably a little more than $108. So for maybe call it $400, we saw tremendous results. So anyway, and then we use the powder. We used to use, we bought a 55-gallon drum of a 50% citric acid solution. Number one, it was harder to manage. Number two, it was just more expensive to transport. It took us years to go through that drum, and the pH of it changed over time, and we just found it was easier to deal with the powder. So after he made the concentrated solution, then he added 1 milliliter at a time of a solution to a 5-gallon bucket just full of water until the pH of the nutrient solution was within the goal range. And then at that point, you can just scale it. So on our farm, and don't copy this because I know all of your conditions are different than our conditions, but just as a benchmark data point, Lee uses a 50-pound bag of citric acid, pours it into a 75-gallon tote of water, mixes it around, and then dilutes it at a rate of 1 to 500. And He prefers he doesn't like the test strips. He thinks it's a lot more accurate. He wanted me to say with these, you fill the tube with water and put a drop of the solution in, and he finds that to be more accurate. So this is, again, our manifold that you already saw once. So the first dosatron is set to 1 to 500, and that tube is going to our citric acid. And then this one is for our EnviroCure, and that is set at 1 to 300, going to our EnviroCure. And then halfway through the season, or once it's starting to fruit, then we add the potassium in there. And Natalie mentioned, what is the pH of all the other inputs? The pH of this, I just looked it up because I wondered after she said that. The pH of our EnviroCure is 5.6. So hopefully it's not messing too much, but I always wonder about the chemical reaction that's happening in our irrigation lines, and sometimes you can think too hard about those things. So now I want to talk about soil moisture sensors. And once we got into the iMonit system, there's so many more things that you can buy that work with the same software that you have. So we decided to trial out soil moisture sensors in one tunnel just to see, like, okay, we think we're irrigating well. What does the data tell us? And we realized we were chronically underwatering. And when, just in one season of using our soil moisture sensor with better irrigating schedules, we saw a really big impact. And it's hard to say, we're doing a lot. Like, we started acidifying our irrigation water. We started monitoring our irrigation. We're doing a lot of these things at the same time. So it is really hard to dial in, like, how much of it was this versus that. But I really do think the soil moisture sensors have helped us a lot. They're really hard to read and understand, and they're only as useful as, it gives you a number of centibars. Well, what does that mean? You really have to understand what that means and how you install it, where you install it, all of those play into it as well. So first, we put one at a depth of 6 inches and one at a depth of 12 inches because we wanted to see how long when we irrigate do we want to turn the water on for. So we want to turn it on and we want to turn it off when we see water in the 12-inch range. But not that that's perfect. We also would move them as the root system would grow. We would add another one further out because now our roots are out here. Are they getting enough water? We know the one directly under the drip tape is getting enough water. So through the data that we were seeing, we started watering more. It was very helpful. So you get an output of centibars. What does that mean? It represents the energy a plant's root system uses to draw water from the soil. Okay, so this, on the right, you can see on the y-axis, you have available water depletion as percentage. So you want to eliminate water stress by staying between the 10 to 50% water availability depletion. So as I was listening to the presentation earlier, maybe we can think about 10% as a stage 2 and maybe 50% as a stage 4. I wish you were still here so he could provide some input on this. Now on the x-axis, you have centibars. So that's the reading you're getting from your soil moisture sensor. So if you have a loam soil, the loam soil is this, it's probably hard to see, but this dotted line says loam down here. So if you follow 10% down where it intersects, that's a reading of 23 centibars. So that is going to be your wet threshold. When you get to 23 centibars, you know your plant is at a stage 2. At a 50, that is all the way down here. That is an 83, so that might be your stage 4. So you want to maybe irrigate when you see a reading of 23 and irrigate it up to an 83 and then let it dry out to a 23. Now there is quite a lag I've learned with these sensors because the moisture has to travel there first and then it has to read it. So it's not instantaneous, so that can cause for overwatering. On our farm, we have a sandy loam, and so we are irrigating between a 12 and a 29. Here is a graph from iMonit on our farm. And so I turned on the irrigation here. It got dry. Well, I definitely let it get too dry, maybe. And then, no, this is dry, this is wet. Well, anyway, so turn on the irrigation here, turn on the irrigation here. So on the 1st, I irrigated, on the 5th, I irrigated, on the 9th, I irrigated, and on the 13th, I irrigated. So this is September. The plants are probably really tall at this point. We are irrigating, this is our controller. It's a Toro Evolution. It's meant for like people's lawns. This is the app. This isn't the app, this is just the desktop, the website. So I can turn on any one of our zones. One zone is one tunnel. I can either turn it on in person at the controller, or again, I can turn it on at my phone. And one thing, we used to have tons of problem with blossom end rot. We basically eliminated this on our farm because the calcium, the blossom end rot is the result of a lack of calcium, not necessarily in the soil. You can have enough calcium in your soil, but it's an inconsistent supply of the calcium. So the calcium comes into the plant via water, and so if you're irrigating irregularly, you're not having a steady supply of that calcium. So we basically, through growing the correct variety and irrigating at the right times, we basically eliminated that on our farm. In addition to having just healthier plants, better vigor, higher yields. Yeah. So I mentioned we got this Minnesota Extreme Weather Grant, and we bought all of these, we were able to buy all of these heaters and circulation fans as a result of that. The way I wrote the grant wasn't about season extension. It was almost exclusively on disease prevention and using the heaters to dehumidify. So the idea is when you have wet leaves on plants, could equal disease. And so like you get out to your farm, it's an August morning, you walk into your high tunnel, it's basically raining inside because there's so much condensation, there's so much guttation, your leaves are wet. And if you send your crew through there to prune or trellis and there's disease on those wet leaves, you are just spreading disease all the way through your tunnel. So the idea is you get into your high tunnel August morning, it's 65 degrees in there, so your high tunnel walls are closed. It's just so humid in there. So you turn on your heater maybe for 30 minutes. Really, in August, you're gonna turn on your heater? Yes, because hot air holds more moisture, and then if you open up your side walls and move that moist, humid air out, you're drawing moisture off of your leaves. So now your crew can work in there earlier without spreading disease, and there's just less opportunity for the disease to linger. I have not tried this yet because we just installed them, but I'm really eager to see how that works, and I'm hopeful that it will make a difference on our farm. So there's lots of maintenance on these high tunnels. Our drop-down side curtains are held in place by these nylon strings that are attached to the hip and baseboards, which are wood, and so as the wood deteriorates, the screws pop out of them because it's just bad wood, and then they're no longer tight, so in the wind they're flapping, and oh, the sound of flapping plastic just gives me goosebumps. Also, we have wiggle wire here on this hip board, and you can see we have C-channel and wiggle wire there, as well as C-channel and wiggle wire there. That's because one day air got into our high tunnel and kind of started lifting the plastic off, and the screws attaching this C-channel to the wood pulled right out. So just making sure that you're monitoring your high tunnels. This is a picture of punky wood. Of course, no nail or screw is going to stay in that. So in one tunnel, our oldest tunnel, we did replace it with this metal. I think you could buy wood and spend the labor to replace it 6 times for the same price as putting that metal in once. So definitely a luxury. Limit switches, plastic can be tight or it can be loose, and you want to be monitoring your limit switches so it doesn't overcrank the motor. And also this cable can fray as it moves through the through the wall, but that's specific to drop down curtains, not specific to roll up curtains. And with that, that's my last slide. So if anyone has any questions.
Thank you so much, Becca. So we have roll up sides, you have roll downs, and we can't use ours in the snow, I think. How do you find that the roll downs work when you have snow?
They work great. No problem. That would be another reason. Yeah, a pro for the drop down curtains.
More with the roll downs. You said one of your tunnels was inflated on the
Yes.
sidewalls. Do you have the roll downs inflated?
No.
Do you know if that's possible? Is that a thing?
So our greenhouse, we have, you can find them on hog barns or turkey barns, and they're like inflated tubes. I don't know the name of them. I can show you a picture on my phone after this, but that's really good for the R value. The material on the drop-down curtains is thicker, so I'm like, maybe it has a higher R value. We do have the end walls inflated. And I will say just anecdotally with the inflated ceiling, roof, is that it feels different in there, and I see things grow better in there. I haven't measured why or looked at the data that supports that. I mean, it's consistently a few degrees warmer, but I wonder if there's less extreme or it just grows better plants.
So on the double layer, we had an experience, just another plug for that. In addition to what he said about the diffusion of light or whatever, we had one house with only a single layer due to a manufacturer's defect, and all of them were the same. On a windy day, the house with just one layer shook and scared us. But that second layer seems to be like protection against like wind gusts.
There's some
It just doesn't
movement,
move
yeah.
the structure. as
And I would
much.
also say hail as well will bounce off of a double layer because it's like jumping on a bouncy house. Yeah, I mean, nothing's stopping a baseball hail.
Yeah, I just have a little question for you. I've worked in water for years, but you got two things you got to look at. If you're on your own well, you should always have it tested because it can be very high in E. coli or any other contaminants. And if you're on what they call a rural water system, which I worked in that for years, you need to contact who your supplier is and see are they softening the water, how they're softening it, so you know your kind of pH and what the chlorine level is. Now, you can put dechlorinators on. I mean, all this information really ends up, what kind of water are you putting on your plants? And if you have no chlorination at all, you could have a bacteria growth problem in what they call rainwater storage tanks. So everything you do with water, there's a lot of little check boxes you should check. Just get information.
Okay, you mentioned, was it called I'm On It?
IMONNIT.
IMMO.
MONNIT.
If I'm not mistaken, Monit is like the company, and then
Yes.
I'm on it, like iPhone. I'm on it is their device.
So Smart Farm Innovations uses I'm On It products.
I never thought of it like I'm on it though. I love it. Oh yeah, over here. Sorry, Mari, and then coming to you, Andrew.
Have you ever used shade cloth on any of your tunnels, and what do you see as like the benefits versus cost of that?
I've never used shade cloth on my high tunnels. I do in our greenhouse where we grow our transplants. I wish I could lower the temperature in the high tunnels some days, and I'm like, I should probably put up shade cloth, but it just seems too annoying. So, or I don't know, we just haven't.
Yeah, so my high tunnels, they're inflated. The roof, the sides, the roll-up sides, the skirting, they're all inflated. So even when the roll-ups open, it squeezes the air out of them, and it makes the tunnel like super rigid. So my high tunnels are rated for like 100-mile-per-hour wind. So I don't get nervous about weather. And then kind of going back to, you mentioned wind, how you have to close your tunnels during high wind. With Arisha, there's a wind station. So anything over like 25 or 30, whatever I set it at, it will close just that one side of the tunnel. If it's coming out of the south, it'll close the south sides, leave the north sides open, vice versa. So that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
I really like that feature. And then, like you said, when you're at happy hour and then there's a storm rolling through, you can just hit close and it closes everything. So, it's definitely a benefit.
You were talking about the dehumidification, Becca, and running the heaters and then venting. We did that this fall, but we learned the hard way. We had 2 inches of precipitation in the tunnel on one of those mornings, and then we were able to set it to kind of burp the humidity out like you're talking. But the thing I don't know, and I'd be interested maybe to keep in touch with you on, is do you run the heaters before you open the vents? Or do you open the vents and run the heaters at the same time? There's like a sequencing that we're trying to figure out. So if anybody knows that.
Andrew has experience with that because I haven't tried it yet.
Yeah, so with my system with Orisha, it's got dehumidification built in. So it'll kick the heater on when it gets so humid. It'll turn that heater on, then a minute or two later, my roll-up sides will open, or it will kick on the ventilation fan to exhaust everything out, depending on the temperature. So it's all temperature and humidity driven. So yes, yep, heater first, then vent.
Who else? Does he over? Yeah, sorry, Andy.
So we don't have a high tunnel, but watching this is like, wow, this seems like a pain in the ass.
You're not wrong.
We have 2 cat tunnels and we push them up by hand with Velcro. So obviously there's some automation I'm interested in, and beyond that. But I'm curious, like, do you have any idea, or maybe you have exact data, how much time did it actually take you, start to finish, from leveling the ground to flipping the switch and the high tunnels running on its own? How long did that whole process actually take you? Hours or days? I'm interested.
Yeah, if we were to, we did it over time when we had like 2 hours or when we had a day extra, or so it's hard to quantify. If I were to think about it, I think 2 people, 2 weeks. That's a big estimate. And we got better over time. There were a lot of learning on the job opportunities.
All right, let's hear it for one last time for Becca Rudebusch.